Well, good afternoon, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to a Graduate History Learning Community webinar in which we're going to focus on the library and the research process. And I'm specifically kind of focusing on the idea of what is available to you and how can you access the needed material. Obviously, working in a history program and pursuing a degree, y'all are very familiar with the need to complete research and to have access to quality, peer-reviewed sources that are academic in nature and very reliable, as that is ultimately part of what we look for when we're pursuing research and even making the case as to why research is needed. And today, joining me, I have an individual from the library by the name of Brian Rickman, who will be answering some questions regarding the library, its capabilities, what they have, how we complete research using their resources, and also sharing some insightful information that you can definitely utilize in your program of study. So Brian, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Chris.
Sure. First of all, just very basic question. What can you tell us about the library as a distance learning student? I'm sitting in Central Virginia. You're in Manchester, New Hampshire. How can I access the library?
Well, it's a great question, and the library has changed a lot in the last couple of decades. So we are very aware that the majority of our students do not have access to the physical library, the Shapiro Library as it stands. So when we're purchasing items, we generally have distance education students on the forefront of our minds and thinking about how are those students going to be able to access the different resources that we have. So we default to buying things electronically. We have, I just checked, we have 223 different electronic databases available. We have a collection of about, I want to say 150,000 ebooks available, and that's growing day by day. And then we do have a print collection available. The print collection is not only there for our on-campus students to browse and check things out, but it's also available to our off-campus students. So if off-campus students do require one of our physical books, the print books that we have sitting on the shelf, we'll always package those up and ship those off to our students as well. So the nice thing about this day and age is that so much is available electronically. It's just a matter of using the databases effectively to find the materials that they need because there is so much stuff out there.
Okay, one question I did want to follow up. You'd mentioned ebooks. Now, when you talk about ebooks, they are basically available through the library. You would log into like MySNHU, go to the library webpage, and then you have the full text access to the book. Is that what you mean when you say ebooks?
That's what I mean. Yep, it's
Okay.
just like a print book. Doesn't necessarily look like it's been scanned in from the book. It's more of the HTML or the electronic version of it, but it's the same content, and you'll find a lot of the same photos and images there. Each of the ebooks, the platforms is a little bit different, but the concept sort of remains the same. You can download some books for a specific amount of time, could be only 3 hours sometimes, sometimes up to 2 weeks. But you can always go back into the library, search for the title of that book, and even read it online if you have an internet connection. And if you want to take that book with you for a little bit, you can download it and you'll have access to it there. So.
Okay. Then you also mentioned something about shipping a book out. Can you talk about that process and what you're referencing?
Yeah, so we have an office. It's called Interlibrary Loan and Document Delivery. And so I'll take the first part of that, interlibrary loan. That refers to items that the Shapiro Library may not have access to. So we have a pretty decent collection, but we just can't afford to buy everything out there, which is why we partner with other libraries in the region, and then we also have nationwide partnerships as well. So if you're finding something either through a search in the library or through an external search, and you're wondering if SNHU has access to it, if we do not have access to it, let's say an article, for example, we'll track that article down at a different institution and then deliver that article to you electronically. We can do the same thing with books, although books take a little bit longer because we rely on that library to ship us the book and then we ship it off to you. We're more likely to purchase the book electronically if it's available and just make that copy available. The second part of that is the document delivery. So I said we have about 100,000 books in the Shapiro Library right now in print. So any of those books that our students want, what they would do is just put in that interlibrary loan / document delivery request. We'll package up the book and then mail that book to the student's home address. There is a caveat to that. It's free of charge for you to receive the book, but you do have to pay the shipping to get the book back to us. But you can do that the cheapest way possible. And I always stress to students, remember that you have local public libraries out there as well. Sometimes, mainly the books that we have are academic in nature, but as opposed to a public library, which tend to be a little bit more general. But don't forget that the public libraries near you could have some of the resources available as well. So, and then you don't incur those costs to ship the book back to us.
Yeah, and when you talk about public libraries in your area, sometimes other colleges and universities also have different policies related to having the ability to access their collections as well. So that might be another option to locate that academic type book that you're searching versus a public library. It would just depend on their policies.
Definitely. I think that's a great point. Yeah, check if you do happen to live close to a university or a community college or whatever, take a look at their policies. Just give them a call. Sometimes they do have a policy where you can get a guest card and become a guest member of that library and be able to check things out. And generally, even if you can't check things out, you could still run over to that library and take a look at the material and at least make photocopies or take some information from the text that you want. So good point.
One of the other things you mentioned was document delivery, and one of the things that kind of popped into my mind when you said that was journals and peer-reviewed sources. And one of the things, we kind of always encourage students to do, is to access those types of peer-reviewed sources, get into the scholarly journals, to utilize those as valuable research tools as well. How's that process work in terms of searching those sources? What do you have access to? Can you explain that to us a little bit?
Yeah, I can actually take us out to look at the library homepage if you don't mind. We can sort of start from there and take a look at the peer-reviewed article or searching for peer-reviewed articles if you want.
That would be wonderful.
All right, let me share my screen. Just give me a second. And we're going to start from the Shapiro Library homepage. So I hope everybody can see the library homepage. That's libguides.snhu.edu/home. And this is your Shapiro Library webpage, and I call it sort of the portal to finding information from the library. Before we dive into looking at peer-reviewed articles and other resources that we have, I do want to point out in the upper right-hand corner, you can see a yellow sort of button that says Chat 24/7 with the librarian, and then below that, an email address and a phone number. Those are our reference desk options, so basically our help options. If students are out there, when you're out there searching for things, if you're not finding something that you thought you would find, or you're just not sure where to search or how to search, please feel free to use any of those options. You can email us, you can give us a call, and then you can chat with us as well. The chat 24/7, so where the 24/7 part comes in is, no, we do not have Shapiro librarians on staff 24 hours, 7 days a week, but we do partner with other institutions. So when our reference desk closes down at about 9 o'clock at night, then that automatically kicks over to our other partners that we're working with. And whereas they may not be as familiar as we are with all the assignments students are working on, they can still work with our students to help them get started in their research. So if you're chatting with us late at night, very early in the morning, you're probably not chatting with a Shapiro librarian. You're probably chatting with somebody from another institution, and they can at least get you started in how to search through our databases and which resources to use. So in looking for information from our library, we can go a couple of different ways. And the first way that I'll point out is actually the MultiSearch, sort of in the middle of the page. It's under that search for books, articles, and more. And the MultiSearch, what it is basically searches through many of our databases. I'd say most of our databases. and it's going to find things like ebooks, um, regular print books if we have them, scholarly journals or scholarly articles, reports, videos, things like that. So let's just do a quick search out there and I'll model how this search works for you. I did a very broad search, Civil War, right? So we could be talking about the American Civil War. We could also be talking about other civil wars going on in other countries. But by default, it's going to bring up a lot about the US Civil War at the top because it's sorting information by relevance. So what we've done here is basically comb through a lot of our databases looking for information. It comes up with this US Civil War research starter. And all that is just basically, think of it like a vetted Wikipedia page to explain a little bit about the causes of the Civil War, what the Civil War was all about, who were the major figures or key figures in the Civil War. And so basically just to give you a general sense of the Civil War. Next thing on the list, you can see Civil War. It's actually an electronic video. So this is actually, it would point us out to one of our video databases. I'll go ahead and open it up really quickly. But you can actually stream this video if you want. So not only do we have academic journals, we also have all sorts of video archives, newspaper archives, and things like that. And if we were to play this, it would play the video on the Civil War, America, the Story of Us. Go back to our list of results, and then just below that, you can see we have a print book. For off-campus students, majority of our students, if you wanted this print book shipped to you, we talked about that interlibrary loan or document delivery request. You would just click request this item and you'll log in and we'll know where to ship that book to you. Same thing if you were to go just a little bit below down to number 6, you can see that's an actual ebook. So if we were to click on that, it would bring up the ebook for us. If we scroll up back to the top of our results and you look on the left-hand side, that's where we can see the peer-reviewed option. So once we click on peer-reviewed, then we're going to be filtering to academic sources that have gone through that peer-reviewed process. And so that peer-reviewed process would mean that people in the field, your peers, have looked at the research done on these different sources, these different journals, and sort of signed off on how well that research was done and allowed that information to be published in the journal. So when it goes through that peer-reviewed process, we're talking about people who work in the field, who research in the field, and they're basically, you could probably consider them experts in the field. And so they're the ones that are looking at other people's work and determining if it's of such a quality that they want to publish in that journal. So now we've limited it to electronic resources that are peer-reviewed, also known as scholarly, and we're down to about 177,000. And this is just a basic, really basic way of searching the databases. We could search for causes of the Civil War, we could search for key figures in the Civil War, we could do something like Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War, but for this search I just left it very broad for right now. And if we want any of these items, we would just click on the PDF, and it's going to bring up the actual article for us, and we can download this to our computer if we want. So that's sort of a really quick and easy way of finding peer-reviewed information from the Shapiro Library. I kind of call this step 1 in your library research. You know, this is a great place to start. It pulls a lot of information, as you can see, even with narrowing it down a little bit, you still have more information than you have time to go through. But it's a great way just to get in there and start digging around and see some of the different themes that develop in your research and get a sense of how else you could do your search.
On the right-hand side of the screen, I see where it says expand your search. It talks about ProQuest, culture, Web of Science. Are those just additional opportunities to search in, like different research guides, or what is that area over there?
Yep. So the MultiSearch is from a company, you can see it up at the very top, EBSCO. And it doesn't do a great job of always communicating with these other databases like ProQuest and Web of Science and Emergent Intellect. So these are just, it's more of a reminder from us to say, well, you have some other resources out there that you can search. So the multi-search, it's good. Like I said, it searches many of our databases, but it doesn't search all of them. And there are many times where maybe the multi-search is a little bit too broad. It's pulling from so many disciplines, pulling from so many areas, that it can sort of cloud the results a little bit. And so if you're looking, if you kind of know that you're looking for something in a historical lens or a social science lens or a psychological lens, you can go into one of those specific databases from those disciplines and do your search. And that way you can sort of filter out some of the things that don't really pertain to your topic and focus more on resources that will pertain to your topic. So yeah, right-hand side, if we click on any of those, it's just going to bring up a different search for us, and we can do our search in any of those databases.
So a lot of search opportunities then to locate the information that you need or you're looking for within your research. Wonderful. Primary sources. I know, students are, especially history students, obviously, are writing research proposals, for example, they need to utilize both primary and secondary sources. And, obviously there's a big difference between those two sources, as you know, with primary sources being directly from that time period that's under study. Do you have any search options for primary sources, or are you only focused on secondary sources?
A lot of what you're going to find in this multi-search is going to hit on the secondary nature. So let's actually go back to the library homepage. And I said there were a couple of different ways that you could go into our databases. So we did the multi-search. Let's try a different way, which is the more focused approach. And we're going to go into our full list of databases by clicking on the A to Z database list, which is located underneath the quick links area on the lower half of the screen. And like I said, we have 220 some databases out there, and this will bring up the full list of databases. We can narrow that down by clicking on the drop-down menu and changing that from all subjects to, we're going to focus on history for this example. But you might want to go into economics, you might want to go into government and military. Your search gets spanned into any of those other disciplines as well. So you're not relegated to just the history area. You can go into any of those other disciplines. When we're talking about primary sources, some of the databases are a little bit better than others. These best bets are pretty good. Again, the focus is mainly going to be on secondary sources. So secondary sources from our standpoint would be, reporting on things that have happened in the past and looking at the effects that those have had on the United States or other countries, things like that. JSTOR is a great database because it does have quite a bit of history in it. And by that I mean you can find some publications that go back into the 1800s. So again, if we're searching for something like the Civil War, we could search in that database for Abraham Lincoln and find mention of him in newspapers and articles and things like that. If we scroll down a little bit more, I want to point out that we have the historical New York Times. So let's go ahead and open up that database and we can do a little bit of search in there. So it looks pretty much just like any other database. We mentioned that ProQuest at other companies, so this is just one of the other vendors that we partner with to purchase information to make it available. You can see the coverage below 1851 to 2013. So we're looking at just the New York Times right now. We're not looking at any other publication, just what's been published in the New York Times. So we're going to be a little bit limited in scope, but that's okay for this example. Let's do, I mentioned Abraham Lincoln. So let's do that example. We'll just search his name. And I'd expect that we would find quite a bit of information or quite a bit of articles from the historical New York Times. So here we have almost 25,000 that have been published. And you can see that this one was published in 1945. So obviously, we're not at the point where we would consider this a primary source. What you would want to do is actually change the sort to the oldest first. So that way we're getting New York Times articles that mention Abraham Lincoln. Are we 100% positive it is President Abraham Lincoln? Not exactly. There could be somebody else named Abraham Lincoln that they're reporting on. But we can kind of glean from the articles and the subject matter that we do begin to talk about Abraham Lincoln and then as he becomes president. So as we scroll through this list of results, you can see the dates are getting a little bit newer. So there's 1859, and I'm actually going to go to the next page. And we'll start to get a little bit later on. And then, so you have an article from, what is this, 1860, the coming administration views, opinions, sentiments, and purposes of Abraham Lincoln, his positions on slavery. So really fascinating stuff that we have access to, not only in this database, but in other databases. And so this is actually, if you're looking for a primary source on the Civil War, on Abraham Lincoln, the causes of the Civil War, this might be something that you would want to take a look at. And some of the other databases have similar primary sources. Sometimes you just have to figure out, well, is it searching by the most relevant, or showing the most relevant resources first, which are often secondary sources? How can I manipulate the database so that I'm finding things that were actually published or written at the time of that I'm looking at? So that's just one way that we could do our search for peer-reviewed publication, or I'm sorry, not peer-reviewed publications, but primary source publications.
But you're very limited in your primary sources, correct?
We are, yep. We are. We actually will point students, if we were to get a question like this, we would point students to the historical New York Times as a place where they could find something. But there are some great repositories out there as well from other institutions and from government organizations who have fascinating and wonderful collections from whatever time periods you're looking at. So I will often direct students to do a search for whatever topic they're looking for and tack on primary sources. It could be a museum, it could be a special collection. There are all sorts of places that curate and compile primary sources from specific either time periods or events that have happened. And those collections are becoming more and more available because they want people to have access to them so they can become more aware of that event or time in history.
All right. Well, I thank you for your time. Do you have any parting words for our scholars?
Well, let me just go back to the homepage and say that again, I really appreciate you inviting me to do this presentation for you and your students. I hope that it was helpful. We have a lot of information, a lot of sources and a lot of different ways that you can approach doing research for this class or any other class. And again, up in the upper right-hand side, all the ways that you can contact the librarian. If you're stuck on an assignment or you're stuck not knowing where to search for a specific topic, please use any of those ways of contacting us. We're more than happy to sit down with you then and talk about your topic. We can also email back and forth and sort of figure out a search strategy there. And, we're great partners with our faculty, so we're always directing students to, talk with their faculty members too and ask about the assignment and ask questions and ask about the research process. And so we always appreciate partnering with them and look forward to hearing from students in the future to see how we can help them. So thank you.
All right, Brian. Well, thank you so much, and